Maya Johnson sat at the far end of the conference room, scrolling through slides on her laptop. It was almost 8 p.m., and most of the office had emptied out hours ago. But Maya wasn't ready to leave just yet. She needed to finish preparing for tomorrow's big presentation, a marketing campaign that could make or break Apex Innovations' chances of landing a multi-million-dollar client. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above her head, casting a pale glow across the polished, wooden table. Papers were spread out in front of her, along with half-empty coffee cups and sticky notes scribbled with reminders. Her phone buzzed on the table, but she ignored it. She knew who it was. Her husband, Daniel Carter. He'd been texting her all day, asking when she'd finally come home. But Maya couldn't afford to stop now, not when so much depended on this project. Greg leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the edge of the table. He glanced at Maya, then exchanged a smirk with Lisa, who sat 2 seats down. Neither of them had contributed much to the meeting earlier that afternoon. Instead, they'd spent most of the time whispering jokes under their breath while Maya led the discussion. Now, Greg cleared his throat loudly, breaking the quiet concentration in the room. "So," he said, dragging out the word like it was some kind of accusation. "Are you sure you've got everything under control here? I mean, we don't want another mishap." Maya looked up from her screen, her dark eyes narrowing slightly. She recognized the tone immediately. It was the same one Greg always used when trying to undermine her. Over the past year, she'd noticed how he would question her decisions, more aggressively than anyone else's. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just competitive. But lately, his comments had grown sharper, nastier. "I'm fine, thanks for asking," Maya replied coolly, forcing a polite smile. "Just going over the final details before sending everything off." Lisa snorted, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Final details, isn't that what assistants are for?" She shot a glance at Greg, who grinned in agreement. Maya clenched her jaw but kept her composure. She'd learned long ago not to let people, like Lisa, get under her skin. Still, moments like these made her wonder why she even bothered staying at Apex Innovations. Sure, it was a prestigious company, and working there had opened doors she never thought possible. But the constant microaggressions, the sideways glances, the subtle jabs, the thinly veiled insults, it wore her down more than she cared to admit. "You know," Greg continued, leaning forward now, his voice dripping with false concern, "it's just, we've been hearing things. Rumors about deadlines slipping because someone can't keep up." He paused dramatically, letting the insinuation hang in the air. "And honestly, if you're struggling, maybe you should say something. No shame in admitting you need help." That did it. Maya closed her laptop gently and placed it aside. She folded her hands on the table and fixed Greg with a steady gaze. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I haven't missed a single deadline since joining this team. In fact, I've delivered results faster than anyone else in this department. So unless you have actual evidence to back up your claims, I suggest you focus on your own work instead of questioning mine." For a moment, Greg looked taken aback. Then his expression hardened, and he sat up straighter in his chair. "Well, excuse me for being concerned," he snapped. "But maybe if you weren't so busy playing the victim, you'd realize people are starting to talk." "Playing the victim?" Maya repeated, incredulous. "You think pointing out racism makes me a victim?" "Oh, here we go again," Lisa muttered, rolling her eyes. "Every little thing has to be about race, doesn't it?" Maya stared at her. Disbelief etched across her face. Was this really happening? Had they sunk so low that they couldn't even pretend to respect her anymore? For years, she'd worked twice as hard as everyone else, just to prove herself. To show them she belonged in this room, at this table, in this position. And yet, no matter what she achieved, there were always people like Greg and Lisa waiting to tear her down. Before she could respond, Greg stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You know what? Enough of this nonsense. If you're too sensitive to take constructive criticism, maybe you shouldn't be leading this project in the first place." "That's rich, coming from someone who hasn't contributed a single idea all week," Maya shot back. her patience finally cracking. Maybe you should try earning your paycheck for once. Greg's face turned red, and for a second it looked like he might explode. But then Lisa stood up too, stepping between them. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "We're supposed to be a team, but you're making it impossible." "And whose fault is that?" Maya demanded, rising to her feet. "You've done nothing but sabotage me since day one. Admit it. You hate the fact that I'm better at my job than you'll ever be." Lisa froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, without warning, she grabbed a can of soda from the table and hurled its contents directly at Maya. The cold liquid splashed over her head, soaking her blouse and dripping onto the floor. The room fell silent, save for the faint fizz of bubbles hitting the carpet. Maya stood there stunned, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Slowly, she raised a hand to wipe the sticky liquid from her face, her fingers trembling with anger. And something else. Humiliation. Betrayal. All eyes were on her now, watching, waiting to see how she would react. Greg broke the silence first, laughing nervously. "Wow, okay. That escalated quickly," he said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. But no one joined in. Even Lisa seemed unsure of herself, clutching the empty soda can like it might somehow protect her from the consequences of her actions. Maya took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. Not now. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, the door to the conference room swung open, and a tall figure stepped inside. It was Daniel Carter. Maya's heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? Before she could process his sudden appearance, Daniel scanned the room, taking in the scene before him. His sharp brown eyes landed on Maya, standing drenched and defiant, then moved to Greg and Lisa, both looking guilty and cornered. Without saying a word, he crossed the room, his presence commanding attention. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low but laced with authority. Everyone held their breath, waiting for someone to answer, but no one dared to speak. Maya swallowed hard, meeting her husband's gaze. For a brief moment, she considered brushing it off, telling him it was nothing, but she knew she couldn't. Not this time. With a small nod, she signaled to Daniel that yes, he should handle it, because deep down she trusted him completely, and Daniel didn't disappoint. Daniel Carter didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. The scene spoke for itself. Maya stood there drenched and humiliated, while Greg and Lisa fidgeted awkwardly in their seats. Their expressions said it all: guilt, fear, and an attempt to downplay the gravity of their actions. Daniel's jaw tightened as he took in every detail: the sticky puddle forming near Maya's feet, the empty soda can still clutched in Lisa's hand, and the nervous laughter that Greg was trying, and failing to suppress. He turned to Maya first, his voice soft but firm. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded slowly, though her trembling hands betrayed how shaken she truly was. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply looked into his eyes, silently pleading for him to understand. And he did. Daniel had always been able to read her without needing words. He gave her a small nod, letting her know he had this under control. Then, Daniel turned his attention to Greg and Lisa. His demeanor shifted instantly. Gone was the warmth he'd shown Maya. Now his expression was cold and unyielding. "What exactly happened here?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with steel. Greg opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He glanced at Lisa, hoping she'd step in, but she avoided his gaze entirely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Greg stammered, It wasn't that big of a deal, just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Daniel repeated slowly, his eyebrows arching. "You call pouring soda on someone's head a misunderstanding?" "Well, yeah," Greg replied, gaining some false confidence. "I mean, it's not like we hurt her or anything. She's just overreacting because..." "Because what?" Daniel interrupted sharply, taking a step closer to Greg. "Because she's black? Is that what you were going to say?" The room fell silent. No one dared to breathe. Greg's face turned bright red and he quickly shook his head. No, that's not what I meant at all. Oh, really? Daniel pressed, his voice rising slightly. Then why don't you explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to treat my wife like this? Or better yet, why don't you explain it to your boss? Lisa gasped audibly, finally finding her voice. Wait, you're her husband? As in the Daniel Carter, the billionaire CEO? That's right, Daniel said coolly, crossing his arms over his chest. And since I happen to own a significant stake in Apex Innovations, I suggest you start explaining yourselves before I decide to shut this entire company down. The color drained from Lisa's face. She glanced around the room, looking for support. But the few remaining colleagues who had witnessed the incident were too afraid to intervene. They knew better than to cross Daniel Carter. His reputation preceded him. He was known not only for his immense wealth but also for his zero-tolerance policy toward injustice. Greg tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. Look, Mr. Carter, it was just a joke. We didn't mean any harm. Honestly, Maya probably started it by doing what? Daniel cut him off, his voice dangerously low. By excelling at her job? By working harder than anyone else in this department? By refusing to let people like you bring her down? Greg opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. He sank back into his chair, defeated. Lisa buried her face in her hands, muttering something about regret. But Daniel wasn't interested in apologies. Not tonight. He turned to Maya once more, his expression softening. Do you want me to handle this? He asked gently. Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She trusted Daniel completely, but part of her still hoped this could be resolved quietly. Deep down, however, she knew it wouldn't be. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message, about standing up for herself and everyone else who had ever been treated unfairly in the workplace. With a determined look, Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Get me the board members on the line, he said curtly. Now. Then, addressing the room, he added, effective immediately, Greg and Lisa are fired. Anyone else involved in this harassment will follow them out the door. Do I make myself clear? The room erupted in murmurs, but no one dared to object. Even the HR manager, who had been lingering nervously in the corner, nodded silently. Daniel's decision was final, and everyone knew it. As Greg and Lisa gathered their belongings under Daniel's watchful eye, Maya sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. Relief, anger, pride. They all swirled, together in a chaotic mix, but above all she felt grateful for Daniel, who had walked into her life when she needed him most, and grateful for the strength she'd found within herself to stand up against the injustice she'd endured for far too long. Once Greg and Lisa were escorted out of the building, Daniel knelt beside Maya, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's over, he said softly. You don't have to put up with this anymore. Maya looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. But what happens next? Daniel smiled faintly, his gaze unwavering. Next, we rebuild, together. The next morning, Apex Innovations buzzed with whispers about what had happened the night before. News of Daniel Carter's dramatic intervention spread like wildfire through the office. Employees huddled in corners, speculating about the fallout. Some were shocked by Greg and Lisa's behavior. Others admired Maya's composure during such a humiliating moment. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one crossed Daniel Carter and walked away unscathed. By mid-morning, Daniel called an emergency meeting with the entire staff. The conference room was packed when he entered, his presence immediately silencing the murmurs. He stood at the front of the room, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table as he scanned the sea of faces. His expression was calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes that kept everyone on edge. For those who don't know me, Daniel began, his voice steady and clear. I'm Daniel Carter, CEO of Carter Tech Industries. And yes, I own a significant stake in this company. He paused, letting his words sink in. Last night I witnessed something that made me question whether Apex Innovations deserves my continued investment. A collective gasp rippled through the room. No one had expected him to be so blunt. Even the senior executives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. What happened last night wasn't just an isolated incident, Daniel continued. It was symptomatic of a much bigger problem. A culture of disrespect, discrimination, and hostility that has clearly taken root here. And let me make one thing very clear. I will not tolerate it. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Maya, who sat quietly near the back of the room. Her damp blazer hung over the back of her chair, a subtle reminder of the previous night's events. Maya Johnson is one of the most talented professionals I've ever met, Daniel said firmly. She works harder than anyone else in this department, yet she's been subjected to harassment and racism simply because of who she is. That ends now. His gaze swept across the room, locking onto each person in turn. Effective immediately. Anyone found guilty of discriminatory behavior will face immediate termination. This includes verbal abuse, microaggressions, or any form of bias. If you can't treat your colleagues with basic human decency, you don't belong here. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, cleared her throat nervously. Mr. Carter, while we appreciate your concern, these matters are typically handled internally. There are protocols. Protocols? Daniel interrupted sharply, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. Your protocols allowed people like Greg and Lisa to harass my wife for months without consequence. Do you really think I'm going to trust you to fix this? Karen flushed bright red and sank back into her seat, unable to meet his gaze. Daniel didn't wait for a response. Instead, he pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside this folder is a detailed list of policy changes I expect implemented within the next 24 hours. Harassment training will become mandatory for all employees, starting today. Anonymous reporting systems will be set up so victims can come forward without fear of retaliation. And if even one complaint arises after these measures are put in place, I'll pull my funding entirely. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Without Daniel's financial backing, Apex Innovations would collapse. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. After the meeting ended, Daniel approached Maya, who had remained seated throughout the presentation. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of everything that had happened. He knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Maya shrugged, forcing a small smile. "I'm okay. Just processing everything, I guess." Daniel nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to stay here, you know. If this place doesn't value you, then why waste your energy on them?" For a long moment, Maya didn't answer. She stared at the empty chair where Greg used to sit, thinking about all the late nights she'd spent in this office, pouring her heart into projects that barely earned her recognition. Was it worth it? Did she really want to keep fighting against a system that seemed determined to push her down? "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. But another part of me feels like I owe it to myself to fight for change. Not just for me, but for everyone else who's been treated the way I have." Daniel smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "That's why I love you," he said. "Always thinking about others, even when the world tries to break you." Over the next few days, Maya began to seriously consider her options. With Daniel's support, she realized she didn't need to stay at Apex Innovations to succeed. In fact, leaving might give her the freedom she needed to pursue something bigger, something meaningful. Together, they brainstormed ideas for a new venture, a consulting firm dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. They called it Empower EQ. As plans for Empower EQ took shape, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and knowing that Daniel believed in her every step of the way made all the difference. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Daniel's intervention continued to reverberate throughout Apex Innovations. Employees who had once stayed silent began speaking up about their own experiences of discrimination. The HR department scrambled to implement the new policies Daniel had demanded, terrified of losing his investment. Slowly but surely, the toxic culture that had plagued the company for years started to shift. But for Greg and Lisa, life outside Apex Innovations was anything but easy. Fired without references, they struggled to find work in the same industry. Their reputations preceded them, making it nearly impossible to land interviews. Desperate for income, Greg eventually accepted a low-paying job stocking shelves at a local warehouse, while Lisa took a position as a receptionist at a small dental clinic. Both jobs were far below their qualifications, and neither offered the SRI, prestige, or salary they'd enjoyed at Apex. At first, they blamed Maya for their downfall, convinced she had orchestrated the entire ordeal to ruin their careers. But as weeks turned into months, they began to reflect on their actions, or lack thereof. Greg remembered the countless times he'd dismissed Maya's contributions during meetings, dismissing her success as luck rather than skill. Lisa recalled the jealousy she'd felt whenever Maya received praise from upper management, fueling her resentment and leading to petty sabotage. One evening, as Greg and Lisa commiserated over cheap coffee at a diner, they finally acknowledged the truth. They had brought this upon themselves. Their prejudice, insecurity, and refusal to confront their biases had cost them everything. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but perhaps someday they might learn from their mistakes. Back at home, Maya and Daniel celebrated the launch of Empower EQ with a quiet dinner. The firm had already gained traction, thanks to Maya's vision and Daniel's connections. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but together they felt ready to face whatever came their way. As they sat side by side, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Maya leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured, "for believing in me, for standing by me, for everything." Daniel kissed the top of her head, smiling softly. "Always," he replied. "We're a team, remember?" And for the first time in a long time, Maya truly believed it. Months had passed since Maya left Apex Innovations, and Empower EQ was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. With Daniel's support, she transformed her vision into reality, creating a consulting firm that focused on helping companies create more inclusive workplaces. Her mission was simple: to ensure no one would ever have to endure what she went through. And people were listening. The office of Empower EQ was nothing like the cold, sterile environment of Apex Innovations. Located in a vibrant part of downtown Chicago, it was designed to feel welcoming and inspiring. Walls were painted in warm tones, and motivational quotes about equality and teamwork hung everywhere. Plants lined the windowsills, and natural light poured in, making the space feel alive. Employees from all walks of life worked together, sharing ideas and collaborating on projects aimed at breaking down barriers in corporate culture. Maya spent her days meeting with clients, hosting workshops, and speaking at conferences. She had become a powerful voice in the fight against workplace discrimination, using her own story to inspire change. At first, she worried that sharing her experience might make her seem vulnerable, but instead, it resonated deeply with others who had faced similar struggles. People admired her courage and determination, and soon Empower EQ became synonymous with progress. Daniel remained her biggest supporter, both personally and professionally. He helped secure partnerships with major corporations eager to improve their diversity practices. Together, they built a team of experts, psychologists, HR specialists, and former victims of workplace bias, who worked tirelessly to develop strategies tailored to each client's needs. Their approach wasn't just about ticking boxes or following trends. It was about fostering genuine understanding and respect among colleagues. One afternoon, Maya stood in front of a group of executives from a tech startup called Novatech. They had reached out after several high-profile lawsuits revealed systemic sexism within their company. As Maya spoke, she could see skepticism in some of their eyes. These were men and women used to being in control, unaccustomed to hearing hard truths about their leadership styles. "Let me ask you something," Maya said, pausing mid-presentation. "How many of you truly believe your workplace is fair and equal for everyone?" A few hands hesitantly went up. Maya smiled gently. "That's okay. Most people start off thinking they're doing enough. But here's the thing. Fairness isn't about intentions. It's about impact. If even one person feels excluded or undervalued, then there's work to be done. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about employee turnover rates caused by toxic environments. Studies show that companies with diverse teams perform better financially. But this isn't just about numbers, it's about humanity. Every single person deserves to feel safe and respected at work. By the end of the session, the executives were nodding along, asking thoughtful questions. One of them, a middle-aged man named Robert, approached Maya afterward. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I've been blind to a lot of these issues, but I want to do better. Where do we start?" Maya handed him a brochure outlining Empower EQ's services. "Start by listening," she advised. "Talk to your employees, not just the ones in leadership positions, and really hear what they have to say. Then take action. Change won't happen overnight, but every step counts." As word of Empower EQ spread, so did Maya's influence. Social media played a huge role in amplifying her message. Videos of her speeches went viral, earning millions of views. Journalists wrote articles praising her efforts, and invitations to speak at global summits poured in. Yet despite her growing fame, Maya remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from or why she started this journey. Meanwhile, back at Apex Innovations, things were slowly improving, but not without resistance. Some employees embraced the new policies, attending mandatory training sessions and actively working to eliminate bias. Others, however, resented the changes, viewing them as unnecessary interference. Tensions occasionally flared, especially among those who missed the old ways of doing business. Karen, the HR manager, found herself caught in the middle. On one hand, she appreciated Daniel's push for accountability. On the other hand, managing the backlash from disgruntled staff was exhausting. Still, she couldn't deny the positive shifts happening around her. For example, junior employees felt more comfortable voicing their opinions during meetings, knowing they wouldn't face ridicule. Women and minorities reported fewer instances of harassment, thanks to the anonymous reporting system Daniel had insisted on implementing. Even so, Karen knew the road ahead would be long. Changing ingrained attitudes took time, and setbacks were inevitable. But she also knew that giving up wasn't an option, not if they wanted to survive in an increasingly competitive market. Back at Empower EQ, Maya prepared for her biggest milestone yet, publishing her memoir. Titled Unshaken, the book chronicled her experiences at Apex Innovations, the night Daniel walked in, and how she turned pain into purpose. Writing it had been cathartic, forcing her to confront emotions she'd buried for years. Now, as the release date approached, she felt a mix of excitement and nerves. "This is going to change lives," Daniel told her one evening, flipping through the advance copy she'd given him. "People need to hear your story." "I hope so," Maya replied softly. "But I'm scared too. What if they think I'm oversharing? Or worse, what if they don't care?" "They'll care," Daniel assured her, pulling her close. "Because your story isn't just yours. It belongs to anyone who's ever been told they don't belong." When Unshaken hit shelves, it quickly climbed bestseller lists. Critics praised its raw honesty and practical advice, while readers flooded social media with messages of gratitude. Many shared their own stories, thanking Maya for giving them the courage to speak up. Bookstores hosted packed signing events, and talk shows clamored to book her as a guest. Through it all, Maya stayed humble, reminding herself why she started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for fame or fortune. It was to create a world where no one had to suffer in silence. As the months rolled on, Empower EQ expanded its reach, partnering with schools, nonprofits, and government agencies to promote equity beyond the corporate sphere. Maya traveled extensively, spreading her message far and wide, and though the demands of her schedule sometimes strained her relationship with Daniel, they always found ways to reconnect, grounding themselves in their shared values. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment overlooking the city, Maya turned to Daniel with a smile. Do you remember that night at Apex, when everything changed? How could I forget? Daniel chuckled. You looked so strong, even when they tried to break you. I didn't feel strong, Maya admitted, but I had you, and I realized that sometimes strength isn't about standing alone, it's about having someone stand beside you. Daniel took her hand, squeezing it gently. We've come a long way since then. Yes, we have, Maya agreed. And there's still so much more to do. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city twinkle below. Despite the challenges ahead, they felt hopeful. Together they had already accomplished so much, and they knew their work was just beginning. Greg and Lisa sat in a dingy bar on the outskirts of Chicago, nursing their drinks in silence. It was Friday night, but neither of them felt like celebrating. Since losing their jobs at Apex Innovations, life had become an uphill battle. Greg worked long hours stocking shelves at a warehouse, his back aching from lifting heavy boxes. Lisa spent her days answering phones at a dental clinic, bored out of her mind. Both jobs paid barely enough to cover rent, let alone rebuild their lives. The weight of their mistakes hung heavily between them. For months, they had blamed Maya and Daniel for their downfall, convinced they were victims of unfair treatment. But as weeks turned into months, reality began to sink in. They had brought this upon themselves, not because of one bad decision, but because of years of unchecked biases and toxic behavior. Lisa broke the silence first, swirling the last drops of her beer around the bottom of the glass. Do you ever think about apologizing? She asked quietly, not looking at Greg. Greg frowned, setting his drink down. Apologizing to who? Maya? You think she'd even listen? I don't know, Lisa admitted, shrugging. Maybe it's not about whether she listens. Maybe it's about, I don't know, doing the right thing for once. Greg scoffed, leaning back in his chair. The right thing? After everything that's happened, you really think saying sorry will fix anything? No. Lisa snapped, suddenly defensive. But sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves isn't helping, either. We messed up, Greg, big time. And pretending like it's everyone else's fault isn't going to change that. Greg sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He hated when Lisa was right, which unfortunately seemed to happen more often these days. Ever since their firing, they'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, truths they'd rather ignore. Like how Greg's snide comments during meetings weren't just harmless jokes. They were thinly veiled attempts to undermine Maya's success. Or how Lisa's resentment stemmed from jealousy, not fairness. Greg started, trailing off as he struggled to find the words. I keep thinking about that night, about what Daniel said, about how we treated her like crap just because she was better than us. Lisa nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. And now look where we are. Working dead-end jobs, blacklisted in the industry, and for what? Because we couldn't handle seeing someone succeed who didn't look like us? It's not just that, Greg muttered, staring at the table. It's bigger than that. It's everything. All the little things we did or didn't do that added up to this mess. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of conversation from other patrons filled the silence, blending with the faint clinking of glasses behind the bar. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, streaking the neon glow of the sign across the glass. Finally, Lisa straightened in her seat, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. We can't change the past, she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. But maybe we can start making amends. Even if it's too late for us, maybe we can stop others from making the same mistakes. Greg looked at her skeptically. What does that even mean? How do we make amends? I don't know, Lisa admitted. Maybe volunteer somewhere. Teach kids about empathy or something, or write letters to companies advocating for better diversity training. I don't care what it is as long as it's something, Greg thought about it for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Okay, he said. Let's try. But no guarantees it'll work. Nothing's guaranteed, Lisa replied with a small smile. But at least we'll know we tried. Meanwhile, back at Apex Innovations, the changes Daniel had demanded were beginning to take root. Employees who had once stayed silent during incidents of discrimination were starting to speak up. Anonymous reports poured into HR, detailing everything, from subtle microaggressions to outright harassment. While some resisted the new policies, many embraced them, eager to create a safer, more inclusive environment. Karen, the HR manager, found herself overwhelmed by the influx of complaints, but also heartened by the progress being made. She organized focus groups, inviting employees to share their experiences and suggest improvements. Slowly but surely, the culture of fear that had gripped the company for years began to loosen its hold. One afternoon, Karen called a meeting with the leadership team to discuss the latest round of feedback. "We've made strides," she announced, standing at the front of the room. "But there's still work to be done. Some departments are lagging behind, and we need to address that head on." A young manager named Ryan raised his hand hesitantly. "What happens if people refuse to participate? Not everyone's on board with these changes." Karen sighed, knowing he was right. Resistance remained a challenge, especially among older executives clinging to outdated practices. "Then we escalate," she said firmly. Daniel Carter made it clear. Anyone unwilling to adapt will face consequences. This isn't optional. It's essential. As the meeting wrapped up, Karen lingered behind, scrolling through emails on her phone. One subject line caught her eye. "Thank you." Intrigued, she opened the message and read it carefully. It was from an employee thanking her for implementing the anonymous reporting system. According to the sender, it had given them the courage to report years of bullying by a senior colleague. Tears pricked at the corners of Karen's eyes as she closed the email. For so long, she had doubted her ability to lead meaningful change. But moments like this reminded her why it mattered. Why she mattered. Across town, Maya prepared for another busy day at Empower EQ. Her memoir, Unshaken, continued to resonate with readers worldwide, sparking conversations about race, gender, and equality in the workplace. Requests for speaking engagements flooded in, keeping her calendar packed for months ahead. Yet despite her growing influence, Maya remained committed to staying grounded. That morning, she met with a group of interns hired through Empower EQ's partnership with a local nonprofit. The program aimed to provide opportunities for underrepresented youth, giving them hands-on experience in professional settings. As Maya walked into the conference room, she was greeted by a chorus of nervous greetings. "Good morning," she said warmly, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Welcome to Empower EQ. Over the next few months, you'll be working alongside some incredible people who are passionate about creating change. My hope is that by the end of this internship, you'll leave here feeling empowered to pursue your dreams and to help others do the same." The interns exchanged excited glances, clearly inspired by her words. One of them, a shy teenager named Jasmine, timidly raised her hand. "Ms. Johnson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you keep going after everything that happened to you?" Maya smiled gently, remembering the countless times she'd asked herself the same question. "Honestly," she said, "there were days when I didn't think I could. But I realized something important. Giving up wouldn't just hurt me. It would hurt everyone else who needed to hear that their struggles matter. So I kept going. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary." Jasmine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she murmured. "That means a lot." As the meeting ended, Maya watched the interns file out of the room, chatting animatedly about their plans for the summer. Seeing their enthusiasm filled her with hope. Change might be slow, but it was happening. One person, one story, one step at a time. Later that evening, Maya returned home to find Daniel waiting for her in the kitchen. He handed her a glass of wine and pulled her into a hug. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her forehead. "Busy," Maya replied, smiling. "But good, really good." Daniel grinned, squeezing her tightly. "You're amazing, you know, that?" Maya laughed softly, resting her head against his chest. Not amazing, just determined. Well, whatever you are, Daniel said, pulling back to look at her. You're changing the world, and I'm so proud of you. They stood there for a moment, holding each other in comfortable silence. Despite the challenges they'd faced, and those still ahead, they knew they had each other. Together, they had built something extraordinary, and together, they would continue fighting for a better, fairer future. Years had passed since that fateful night at Apex Innovations, but its ripple effects continued to shape lives in ways no one could have predicted. Maya Johnson stood on stage at the annual Apex Diversity Summit, addressing an audience of hundreds. It was strange being back in the same building where she had once been humiliated, but this time she wasn't there as a victim. She was there as a leader, a change-maker, and a symbol of resilience. The room fell silent as Maya began to speak, her voice steady and clear. When I first started working here, she said, glancing around the familiar space, I dreamed of making a difference. But I quickly realized that dreaming wasn't enough. Not when the system itself was broken. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. For years I stayed quiet, hoping things would get better on their own. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, people would see my value and treat me with respect. But silence doesn't fix problems, it hides them. And hiding only gives power to those who want to keep us down. Maya's gaze swept across the crowd, meeting the eyes of individuals who nodded in understanding. Some were old colleagues who had witnessed her struggles firsthand. Others were newcomers eager to learn from her journey. Regardless of their backgrounds, they all shared one thing: a desire for change. That night, she continued, her tone softening slightly. When someone poured soda on my head, I felt defeated, humiliated, like everything I'd worked for didn't matter. But then something unexpected happened. My husband walked in. He reminded me that I wasn't alone, and neither are any of you. Applause erupted throughout the hall, echoing off the walls. Maya smiled faintly, waiting for the noise to subside before finishing her speech. Today, I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to talk about the future, a future where everyone has a seat at the table, where your race, gender, or background doesn't determine how far you can go. That's the world we're building together. One step, one conversation, one policy at a time. As Maya stepped away from the podium, the audience rose to their feet, cheering loudly. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took it all in. The applause, the gratitude, the hope radiating from every corner of the room. For so long, she had carried the weight of her experiences alone. Now she realized she had sparked a movement that extended far beyond herself. Backstage after the event, Daniel greeted her with open arms. You were incredible, he said, pulling her close. Do you know how many lives you've touched today? Maya shook her head, still processing everything. It's not just me, she replied softly. It's everyone who's ever fought for fairness, everyone who refused to stay silent. This isn't my victory, it's ours. Daniel kissed her forehead, pride shining in his eyes. Still, don't downplay what you've done. You've changed the game. Meanwhile, Greg and Lisa had taken small steps toward redemption. After months of soul-searching, they decided to volunteer at a community center focused on mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. Though they knew they could never undo the harm they caused, they hoped to make a positive impact moving forward. One Saturday morning, Greg found himself leading a workshop on workplace ethics. As he spoke to a group of teenagers about the importance of treating others with kindness and respect, he couldn't help but reflect on his own mistakes. Don't wait until it's too late to do the right thing, he advised, his voice tinged with regret. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. Lisa, meanwhile, channeled her energy into advocacy work, writing articles and giving talks about overcoming bias in professional settings. Her pieces gained traction online, sparking discussions about accountability and growth. While she knew forgiveness wouldn't come easily, she was determined to use her story as a cautionary tale for others. At Apex Innovations, the transformation was undeniable. The toxic culture that once defined the company had given way to a more inclusive environment. Employees openly celebrated each other's successes, and leadership actively sought input from marginalized voices. Karen, the HR manager, became a champion for diversity initiatives, ensuring that policies weren't just written, but lived by everyone. During one particularly memorable team meeting, Karen announced a new partnership with Empower EQ to provide ongoing training and support. "This isn't the end of our journey," she told the staff. "It's just the beginning. Together, we can create a workplace where everyone feels valued and heard." As the years went on, Maya's influence only grew stronger. Empower EQ expanded globally, partnering with organizations across industries to promote equity and inclusion. Her memoir, Unshaken, became required reading in schools and businesses alike, inspiring countless readers to challenge injustice wherever they found it. One evening, as Maya and Daniel strolled along the Chicago River hand in hand, she reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked, gazing out at the shimmering water. "How different everything might have been if you hadn't walked in." "All the time," Daniel admitted, squeezing her hand. "But I also think about how strong you were, even before I got there. You didn't need me to save you, Maya. You saved yourself." Maya smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Maybe. But having you beside me made all the difference." Together they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they faced it with unwavering determination and boundless love. Their legacy wasn't just about the battles they'd won or the changes they'd inspired. It was about proving that even in the face of adversity, courage and compassion could light the way forward. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and fight, the world would keep moving closer to the equality they envisioned.